I have often thought that we flatter the darkness. We speak of it as though it prowled with claws and teeth, as though it could pounce upon us from behind the wardrobe or seep like smoke beneath the door. But strike a match in a cavern, and you discover how thin the boast was. The dark has no sinew, it cannot push back. It is merely the name we give to a space the light has not yet entered. I wonder if much of our fear arises from imagining two rival powers wrestling for the world. One bright, one black, equal adversaries locked in eternal combat. Yet if you open the shutters and morning comes in, where does the night flee? Nowhere at all. It was never a substance to be driven out, only a vacancy to be filled. And what we call evil may be of this strange and humbling kind, if evil is not a thing but the failure of a thing, if it is not a positive substance but a hole where substance ought to be. Then our first lesson is that goodness is primary. We begin with the sun and only afterward name the shadow. Consider a moth-eaten tapestry. The pattern exists first, the ragged gaps second. Or think of a tooth with a cavity. Decay is not rival enamel, but the loss of soundness. So, with the soul, what we call wickedness is not some dark metal smelted from infernal mines. It is the corrosion of what was once bright and weighty with worth. This is why evil is perpetually parasitic. It cannot invent. It must borrow strength from the good and bend it, as a thief uses the honest carpenter's tools to jimmy the door. Courage, detached from truth, becomes mere audacity. Desire, detached from charity, becomes consumption. Judgment, detached from humility, becomes cruelty. The river that irrigates the fields, when removed from its banks, becomes flood and famine together. Evil is that removal, the loosening of right order, the subtraction of form, the refusal of light. Hence, too, the grave seriousness of our freedom. We are not puppets. The Creator grants us the astonishing dignity of cooperation. He allows us to say yes, and, oh fearful wonder, He allows us to say no. Love without freedom is a scenic painting, not a country one can inhabit. But if we are to love, we must be able to withhold love. If we are to obey, we must be able to rebel. The risk is inscribed in the gift. To turn from the sun is not to invent a new luminary. It is merely to put one's face into the shade and then accue the day of growing cold. This distinction, I think, clarifies many confusions. Pain is not, in itself, evil. A surgeon's knife and a murderer's knife may both cut, but the one is guided by charity and wisdom, the other by malice or neglect. The ache that warns you from the fire is a mercy, not a monster. Of course, pain can be made evil when it is chosen as a tool for cruelty, or when resentment distills it into bitterness. Yet pain, in its proper office, is a teacher, often severe, seldom sentimental, but committed to our rescue. What then of what we call natural evils, earthquakes, disease, famine? These are not moral agents. They are the groaning of a world that is both sturdy enough to be learnable and perilous enough to be real. If the snow ceased to be cold and the sea forgot to be deep whenever a child ventured out, we should live in a nursery without truth or consequence. The same constancy that enables us to build bridges also leaves us vulnerable when we build them foolishly. None of this empties our sorrow. It situates it. We lament not because nature has a wicked will, but because creation, splendid and wounded, is not yet what it will be. There is, however, a subtler region where evil most often makes its home. Not red-handed violence, but the thinness of the good that is missing. I find in myself less a monster than a vacancy, those hours of petty omission when I withhold a needed word, defer an act of kindness, look past an inconvenient neighbor, or swaddle the truth in silk so it will not disturb my comforts. These are not dramatic crimes, they are little eclipses. Yet the geometry of the soul is such that small shadows can lengthen into afternoon. The devil's cleverness, if I may speak bluntly, is not so much in teaching us to worship darkness as in persuading us not to bother lighting lamps. How, then, does one fight a shadow? By resisting the old mistake of grappling the emptiness itself. You do not wrestle the dark, you light a candle. The spiritual life is not a campaign against an enemy who owns his own territory. It is a maintenance of attention toward the sun. Prayer is a window. Repentance is the unlatching of a stuck sash. Truth-telling is the polishing of glass. The sacraments are the wide casements swung back upon their hinges. Charity is, quite literally, the letting in of warmth. When we love, we do not merely cancel a wrong, we introduce a presence. This is why the story of Christ is not a treatise but a dawn. The Word did not merely explain the night, He entered it. In Him, the light walked our roads and found our caves. He knew the heavy noon when the sky itself seemed darkened. He knew the cellar of the tomb where lamps cannot burn. And then, in the morning no calendar can contain. He stood, and the absence crumpled like a discarded veil. He does not solve evil as a mathematician solves a problem and then pushes the slate aside. He transfigures the world from the inside as bread is taken, blessed, broken, and given. Where He is welcomed, the room brightens. Where He is ignored, the best we can do is arrange the furniture in the dark. Hope, therefore, is not optimism with varnish. It is fidelity to the fact that light is more solid than shadow. If evil is lack, then the future belongs to fullness. There will come a day, look for it with a homesick heart, when nothing lacking remains, no unspoken mercy, no unrighted wrong, no love ungiven, no song unsung. Until that hour, our calling is simple and exacting, to become windows. Not spectacular fireworks, mind you, which fascinate for a minute and leave smoke, but clear panes through which another's garden may be warmed. The saints differ vastly, oak, river, star, but in them all one senses transparency, not the erasure of self, but the self so rightly ordered that glory passes through without distortion. Begin, then, with the ordinary practices that turn us toward the sun. Tell the truth, even when a clever half-truth would prosper you. Give thanks before you can feel it, and the feeling will learn the habit. Attend to beauty, a psalm, a field at evening, a child's patient work, and let it tutor your appetite for the infinite. Seek the company of those who love the light more than their own reflection. Do the work at hand as though it mattered eternally, because it does. Little obediences are candles. Many together become a sanctuary. And if, at the end of the day, you fear that the world is thick with darkness, remember that darkness is never thick. It only seems so when we have forgotten how simple the remedy is. One small flame alters a great room. One soul turned Godward changes the neighborhood of 1,000 acts yet unborn. Do not measure your task by the size of the night. Measure it by the weight of the morning already breaking on the far hills. Lift the latch. Open the window. Let the light in, and then become, in your measure, its kindly reflection. If evil is absence, then the greatest danger lies not in fearing it too much, but in underestimating how subtly it creeps into the hollow places of the heart. You see, no man wakes in the morning with the deliberate aim of becoming cruel, faithless, or proud. What happens is far less dramatic and far more perilous. He forgets. He forgets to remember the source from which his life flows. He forgets gratitude, and in that vacancy pride slips in. He forgets his neighbor's need, and in that vacancy selfishness grows. He forgets God's voice, and in that vacancy the clamor of the world fills the air. Think of a garden. No tyrannical army of weeds storms the soil in the night. The gardener need only neglect his duty, and the wilderness reclaims the space. Evil does not create, it occupies what we abandon. The Christian task, therefore, is not frantic warfare against a rival power, but the steady, faithful tending of the soul, watering with prayer, pruning with repentance, planting with acts of mercy. When the garden is full of good fruit, the weeds find little room to spread. This is why the devil, if I may use the old word, works not by invention, but by parody. He cannot produce joy, but he can offer cheap laughter that leaves one emptier than before. He cannot make courage, but he can encourage recklessness dressed as bravery. He cannot supply love, but he can twist it into lust, which devours rather than gives. Evil is like a shadow painter. It copies the outline, but drains the color. It whispers, "This will suffice." And we settle for the hollow form when the living substance was meant for us. Do you see how this changes the way we ought to live? If we believe evil is some monstrous power equal to God, we may be tempted to despair, as though the world is a chessboard on which two infinite players strive for checkmate. But if evil is absence, then hope becomes more than a sentiment. It is the logical conclusion of reality. Absence is always conquered by presence, even the smallest presence. The weakest saint who loves, the humblest child who prays, brings a kind of solidity into the world that emptiness cannot match. Consider the cross again. From one angle, it is the darkest moment of history, the triumph of evil, the extinguishing of the light. Yet, look closer. Was evil creating anything there? No. It was simply destroying, twisting, corrupting, draining away what it could, and in that very act, it revealed itself as what it truly is, powerless without the good it feeds upon. For Christ, by offering himself freely, filled that void with such abundance of love that death itself became a doorway. The absence was swallowed by the presence. This is why we need not fear the shadows. To walk with Christ is not to walk in a world where shadows do not exist, but to walk with the assurance that the light behind us, above us, and within us is more real than any gloom around us. Our calling is not to curse the dark endlessly, but to bear light. Remember this when you are tempted to despair at the state of the world. Darkness will always look stronger than it is. It looks vast only because it is empty. But even a single candle, your prayer, your kindness, your act of faith, has weight, substance, permanence, and the emptiness must yield before it. We must look more closely at the soul itself, for it is here that the drama of absence and presence unfolds most vividly. The soul was fashioned to be a vessel, a chalice for divine love. Its dignity lies not in being self-contained, but in being filled. When we attempt to close the lid and keep ourselves apart from God, we discover that a vessel cut off from its source cannot remain neutral. It will not stay empty in peace, it will echo with hollowness, and into that echo lesser sounds intrude: vanity, envy, gluttony, fear. They do not storm the citadel by strength, but seep in through the cracks left by neglect. That is why pride is so often called the root of sin. Pride is nothing more than the refusal to receive. It insists, "I am sufficient to myself," and thus shuts the shutters against the light. But sufficiency was never our design. Just as a violin is not meant to be silent wood and string, but to vibrate under the bow, so the human heart is not meant for isolation, but for harmony with its maker. When it denies this, it becomes not its own master, but a hollow thing easily filled with noise. Notice, too, how evil cannot sustain itself. A lie left alone collapses under its own weight. It must be propped by more lies. Hatred consumes its bearer long before it consumes its victim. Lust leaves the soul more famished the more it is fed. This is because all these shadows depend on light to parody. When cut off from the original, they wither. A parasite without a host cannot live. Evil is parasitic in precisely this way. It clings to good, distorts it, and in the end exhausts itself. And what of hell, that fearful doctrine so many would prefer to ignore? If evil is absence, then hell is not so much a chamber of horrors invented by divine caprice, but the final condition of a soul that has chosen absence forever. It is the place where shutters have been nailed fast against the sunrise, where the vessel has refused every drop of living water until the thirst becomes endless. It is not the triumph of evil, but its consummation as nothingness. The door is locked from the inside. Here, then, is the paradox. We are most ourselves not when we hoard our being, but when we give it. The saints are luminous, not because they have hoarded some mysterious resource, but because they are transparent panes through which the light streams. Their very self is preserved precisely because it is surrendered. It is in losing our life that we find it. And so, dear friend, take courage. The shadows around you are not solid walls, but fleeting veils. Your smallest act of faith, spoken prayer in the silence, unseen kindness offered in passing, is a breach in the darkness. To live in the light does not require brilliance, but openness. Lift your face, however weary, and you will discover that the sun has been waiting all along. Evil, I have said, is absence. Yet absence has a peculiar power upon the imagination. Think of a vacant house, its windows shuttered, its garden overgrown. How quickly our minds populate it with specters and whispers. It is not the presence of something, but the absence of life that chills us. So with evil. It frightens not because it possesses strength of its own, but because it has stolen the place that rightly belongs to joy. Shadows loom large precisely because they are cast by something real. Now, this truth should shape the way we think of our daily temptations. Rarely are we faced with a choice between light and darkness in their purest form. More often we are asked to settle for a dim half-light, an incomplete good. To prefer comfort over courage, flattery over honesty, appetite over discipline. None of these are wholly wicked in themselves, but each is a subtraction, a cutting down of the soul's true stature. And a series of subtractions, if uncorrected, can leave us with little more than a ghost of the person God intended us to be. This is why vigilance is needed, not the vigilance of a soldier always expecting ambush, but of a gardener tending tender shoots. A plant neglected does not instantly wither. It fades day by day until one morning you notice it is brittle, dry, and nearly gone. So too with faith. Prayer delayed, thanksgiving postponed, forgiveness withheld. These seem small matters, but each opens a crack where the night can creep in. But take heart. The remedy is equally simple. Light requires no struggle to overcome the dark. It simply shines. Holiness is not achieved by grimacing effort against shadowy foes, but by turning ever more fully toward God. To pray is to open the shutters. To confess is to sweep the room. To love is to set another lamp alight. The house fills with radiance, and the haunting specters scatter. Let us not forget, too, that absence is never the final word. Even in the darkest cavern, there remains the possibility of a spark. The Creator has written His promise into the very fabric of things. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Every star in the night sky is a reminder of this, each one a point of defiance, declaring that emptiness shall not reign. So then, when you encounter evil in yourself or in the world, do not be deceived into thinking you face an equal adversary to the light. You face a lack, and lacks can be filled. Even grief, which feels so heavy, is not a positive enemy but the echo of love's absence. And because it is the echo of love, it points beyond itself to a reunion yet to come. Therefore, our task is not to tremble before the void, but to carry the flame, the smallest flame. And in time, the dawn will rise, and the shadows will be remembered only as the canvas upon which glory once painted its contrast. If evil is absence, then the Christian life must be understood not chiefly as resistance, but as fullness. Too many imagine that holiness is a matter of abstention, of a long list of things one must not do. To be sure, discipline is needed. The shutters must sometimes be closed against the storm. Yet, the greater call is not what we avoid, but what we embrace. A house may be swept and put in order, but if it remains uninhabited, the emptiness will not stay empty for long. So it is with the soul. The absence must be replaced with presence. This is why the Scriptures speak not merely of turning from sin, but of putting on Christ. To clothe oneself in him is to exchange the garments of shadow for the robe of light. Forgiveness is not only the cancelling of a debt, but the opening of a banquet. Repentance is not simply fleeing a ruin, but entering a home. Always the motion is from lack to abundance. Consider how this shifts the way we see our neighbor. When someone falls into cruelty, dishonesty, or despair, our instinct may be to recoil, as though they carried a substance contagious and foul. Yet if evil is absence, then what they suffer is not possession, but privation. The liar is missing truth. The cruel man is missing compassion. The despairing soul is missing hope. And what is missing can be restored. Thus our call is not to despise, but to supply, to speak truth gently, to show mercy, to lend courage. In this way, we imitate the God who fills all in all. And this also explains the curious fact that joy, when shared, does not diminish, but multiplies. A candle lighting another does not grow dim. It doubles the light. In a world where evil feeds like a parasite upon the good, goodness feeds generously upon itself. Love, once given, breeds more love. Hope, once spoken, raises hope in another. Against such multiplication, the mathematics of absence cannot endure. Perhaps this is why the saints, though often poor in possessions, leave behind an inheritance richer than any empire. They leave a trail of fullness, an orchard of kindness, a treasury of faith, a fragrance of prayer that lingers long after their bodies are dust. They did not conquer darkness by wrestling shadows, but by being so full of light that the shadows simply had no place to stand. And so, as we near the end of this reflection, let me offer you this final picture. Imagine your life as a lantern. Left unlit, it is but glass and metal, fragile all and cold. But when touched by the flame of God's Spirit, it becomes more than itself, a bearer of radiance, a guide through the night, a comfort to the weary traveler. The glass does not create the light, it merely holds it. Yet how precious is the holding, for through your lantern, others may find their way. Therefore, do not fear the absence. Fill it. Do not merely curse the darkness. Light a lamp, and remember that one day the morning will come, and every shadow will flee before the sun that never sets. If evil is absence, then the final horizon of all creation is not darkness, but plenitude. Every ache, every sorrow, every grief is but the index finger pointing toward what is not yet complete. You feel the hollow in your heart, not because you are meant for emptiness, but because you are designed for fullness. The hunger is proof that bread exists, the thirst is proof that water flows somewhere, and the longing that stirs beneath every joy and every loss is proof that there is a country where all losses are restored, and joy is without alloy. It is this argument from desire that has always struck me as unanswerable. No one is born with a thirst for that which does not exist. Calves desire milk, and there is such a thing as milk. Birds are fashioned with wings, and there is such a thing as air. We too are fashioned with a homesickness that no earthly home can satisfy. That is why every pleasure fades as soon as we grasp it, why every triumph grows dull in the telling, why every love, however precious, aches with the fear of loss. They are not cruel tricks of the universe. They are signals, signposts to the great presence that alone can fill the absences. And this is the Christian hope. Not that the shadows will grow stronger, but that the light will one day pour into every crevice, filling the universe so completely that absence will be impossible. The scriptures speak of a city where there is no night, not because rotation has ceased or stars no longer burn, but because the radiance of God Himself renders lamps unnecessary. There, every absence will be answered, hunger with feasting, thirst with living water, loneliness with eternal communion. Even now, in the midst of time, we taste fragments of this. A hymn sung with tears, a moment of unexpected forgiveness, the quiet strength of a hand held in suffering. These are not merely comforts, but foretastes. The banquet has not yet begun, but the kitchen door has been left ajar, and the fragrance wafts out to reassure us. And so the Christian task is twofold. First, to guard against the absences that creep upon us through negligence, pride, and fear. Second, to cultivate presence. To invite Christ into every chamber of the heart until no room lies in shadow. Holiness, then, is not grim austerity, but hospitality, the opening of the soul's many doors to the guest who is also the host. Do not think this too lofty or too remote. It begins with very ordinary acts. The prayer whispered before sleep, the word of thanks spoken over bread, the honest apology, the hidden kindness. Each of these is a flame lit in the night, a token of the coming dawn. And when that dawn breaks in its fullness, we shall discover that the darkness, for all its threatening, was only ever the absence of light, and absence, however deep, has no future. Only presence has a future, because only presence has being. If absence is the nature of evil, then every life becomes a theater of choices between vacancy and fullness. Each day, perhaps without noticing, we place ourselves nearer to one or the other. The tragedy is not that so many souls turn to monstrous wickedness, but that they drift, content to leave their hearts half lit, their duties half done, their loves half given. And drifting, like a boat unmoored, leads not to adventure but to shipwreck. For the tide of absence always pulls downward unless we set our sails toward the light. Now, mark this carefully. It is not our strength that fills the emptiness. A glass does not pour itself full. It must be held beneath the fountain. Our part is the turning, the yielding, the lifting of our poverty toward the source. Grace is not earned, it is received. But it is not received by the clenched fist, only by the open hand. That is why humility is not a decorative virtue, but the very posture of salvation. The proud heart closes itself to the inflowing, and so remains hollow. The humble heart becomes a cup brimming over. This explains why joy shines most radiantly from those who have suffered much. Their suffering carved caverns within them, and into those caverns the mercy of God has poured like sunlight into caves. Their wounds became windows. Their very losses became space for a greater fullness. Thus, the Christian paradox. Those who seem most empty to the world are often the most filled with the kingdom. Let us return, for a moment, to the image of light. When you walk into a darkened room, you do not chase the shadows with a broom. You do not command them to depart. You simply strike a match, and instantly the room alters. What was dreadful a moment before is revealed for what it is, mere absence. So with the soul, you need not engage endlessly with every doubt, fear, and temptation. Turn instead to the light, prayer, scripture, thanksgiving, sacrament, and the shadows scatter of their own accord. And what, you may ask, of those who persist in shadow until the end? We cannot know their story fully. Yet I believe that every refusal of the light, every insistence on one's own sufficiency, is already a foretaste of hell. For hell is simply the soul sealed off from the light it was made to receive. It is not brimstone, but barrenness, not torment inflicted from without, but emptiness chosen from within. A door, as I have said before, locked from the inside. But heaven, heaven is not merely escape from pain, but the arrival of fullness. It is the soul's every hollow brimmed with glory. It is love unbroken, joy unthreatened, life unending. It is the absence of absence. The shadows vanish not because they are destroyed, but because there is no crevice left for them to inhabit. Therefore, the question before each of us is very simple. Will you live as one content with hollowness, or as one who hungers to be filled? The choice is made not once, but daily, hourly, in the smallest gestures of faith. And each small yes to God, like a drop of oil in the lamp, prepares the soul for that eternal morning when the bridegroom comes. And so, as I draw these reflections toward their close, let me remind you of what has been before us all along. Evil is not a rival empire, but a vacancy. a hollow echo where music ought to be. To see this is to have the scales fall from one's eyes. The darkness, for all its swagger, has no substance. It is the theatre of absence, and if that is true, then the Christian task is not to cower before phantoms, but to invite reality into the void. Reality, I say, because God is not an idea, but the most real being there is. All other existence borrows breath. He alone is being itself. To live in Him is to be anchored in substance, to rest upon rock, to breathe the air of the eternal. To live apart from Him is to drift into unreality, a shadow life that shrinks with every step. You see, the saints are not dreamers who escaped into fantasy, but the most wide awake of men and women. They dwelt in the light, and in that light they became fully themselves. And what of us? We are invited, even now, to make room. The smallest act, an honest prayer spoken when one feels dry, a kindness offered when one is weary, a truth told though it costs, these are not trifles. They are cracks through which the sunlight pours. They are victories not of noise, but of being. Every time you choose forgiveness over resentment, gratitude over complaint, courage over indifference, you are letting fullness displace emptiness. You are becoming, in your measure, a window of eternity. Do not, then, despise the day of small things. Remember that Christ compared the kingdom not to a fortress, but to a mustard seed, not to a thunderclap, but to leaven hidden in dough. The great reversal of history began in a manger and was sealed in a borrowed tomb. Out of what looked like absence, the absence of power, the absence of hope, came the greatest fullness the world has ever known. The resurrection is God's declaration that vacancy shall not be the final word. Presence triumphs. So lift your heart, even when shadows stretch long. The dawn is nearer than you think. A day is coming when there will be no room left for absence, when God will be all in all, when every hollow will overflow with glory. Until then, walk as a bearer of light. Tend the flame entrusted to you, be a lantern in your corner of the night, and remember, the dark has no destiny, but the light is eternal. My dear friends, if these reflections have stirred you, I would invite you to carry them further. Share them, speak of them, ponder them. Let them be for you not only words, but a call to live as children of the morning. And if you have found in this message even a glimmer of hope, I encourage you, like, comment, share, and subscribe, so that this light may reach others who wander in shadow, and together we may walk toward the rising sun.